Portland rain never stops. Neither did Detective Frank Morrison. 20 years ago, a woman was murdered in apartment 314. The case went cold. Frank's career went with it. But he never left the crime scene. He just changed his job title from detective to building manager. And he waited. Welcome to AI Human Stories. This isn't just another cold case. It's the story of obsession, patience, and what happens when a cop who lost everything finally gets one more chance at the truth. Act 1. The scene of the crime. Riverside Apartments, Portland, Oregon. 60 units of faded brick and broken dreams. The kind of place where people come to start over or hide from what they've done. Frank Morrison knew every inch of this building. 20 years as manager. Before that, 24 years as a cop. But it was the 16 months in between that nobody knew about. The months after they took his badge, when obsession became his only companion. "You're too close to this case, Morrison," the captain had said. "Jennifer Caldwell's been dead 3 months. We've got nothing. Move on." But Frank couldn't move on. Not when every piece of evidence pointed to someone who'd been right there, in the building, the night Jennifer died. Not when his gut told him the killer was still out there, living free while Jennifer rotted in the ground. So Frank made a choice. If the department wouldn't let him work the case officially, he'd work it his way. He cashed in his pension, bought the building manager position when it opened up, and moved into the ground floor apartment. Same building where Jennifer Caldwell had been strangled in her own bed. Same hallways where her killer had walked away clean. Some called it obsession. Frank called it justice delayed. ACT2, the Watchman. Every tenant application that crossed Frank's desk got more than a credit check. It got a full investigation. Background deep enough to trigger red flags. Employment history cross-referenced against Jennifer's murder timeline. Previous addresses checked against witness statements from Jesus Frank, one tenant complained. "I'm renting an apartment, not applying to the CIA." Frank didn't care what they thought. He had a theory. Killers return to the scene. Not immediately, but eventually. The comfort of familiar ground, the arrogance of getting away with it. These things draw predators back. So Frank waited, and watched, and documented everything. His apartment looked like the detective bureau he'd been banned from. Case files covering every surface. Maps marked with colored pins. Photographs of every tenant who'd lived in the building since 1994. Cross-referenced, annotated, analyzed. His ex-wife had been right to leave. "You're married to a dead woman," she'd said on her way out. Frank hadn't argued. Late nights, he'd sit in his apartment with the lights off, watching shadows move through the building, memorizing patterns. Who came home when? Who had visitors? Who acted nervous around apartment 314? 20 years of this. Most people would call it madness. Frank called it homework. Thomas Garrett's rental application arrived on a Tuesday. Middle management type, relocating from Seattle for work. Nothing unusual on paper. But Frank's instincts screamed. Something about the employment history. The gap years that didn't quite add up. The previous addresses that seemed carefully spaced to avoid overlapping with any one location too long. Frank ran his standard deep background, clean on the surface. But underneath, small things that most landlords would miss. A restraining order filed in Sacramento, dropped before it went to court. A complaint in Denver, withdrawn by the complainant who'd moved out of state shortly after. Women, always women, young, professional, living alone, just like Jennifer Caldwell. Frank approved the application, gave Garrett apartment 412, 4 floors up, good sightlines from the street, close enough to monitor. Then he started watching in earnest. For a year and a half, Frank Morrison lived in the same building as a man he suspected of murder. Garrett kept to himself mostly, polite when they passed in the hallway, paid rent on time, no complaints from neighbors. But Frank noticed things others missed. The way Garrett positioned himself in the lobby, always where he could watch the elevator and entrance simultaneously. How he'd subtly steer conversations away from personal history, redirecting with practiced ease. The routine that was almost too routine. Same schedule, same patterns, the kind of consistency that suggested military precision or criminal caution. And the women. Garrett had a type, mid-20s, brunettes, professional careers. He'd chat them up in the mailroom, offer to help with groceries, always friendly but never aggressive. Frank documented it all. Photographs, timelines, pattern analysis, but documentation wasn't proof. And without his badge, Frank had no authority to act on suspicion alone, so he waited. And every night, sitting in his dark apartment, he thought about Jennifer Caldwell and wondered if he was chasing ghosts or justice. Detective Rachel Torres was new to Portland PD's cold case unit. Young, smart, didn't carry the weight of old failures like the veterans did. She'd heard about Frank Morrison, the detective who'd lost his mind over an unsolved murder. Cautionary tale they told rookies about getting too close. But when she reviewed the Caldwell file, something bothered her. The witness statements didn't quite line up. Timeline issues that the original investigators had noted but not pursued. That's when she heard about the AI system at Portland State. Pattern recognition for cold cases. Worth a shot. She uploaded every document from the Caldwell investigation. 30 years of witness statements, forensic reports, suspect interviews. The AI took 2 days to process it all. When the results came back, Torres called her captain immediately. "We need to reopen Caldwell," she said. "Why? What's changed?" "Everything." The AI found contradictions in the alibi statements that humans missed. Thomas Greenberg, the upstairs neighbor who was supposedly across town, his alibi witness described weather conditions that didn't exist that day. Another witness placed his car somewhere traffic cameras prove it couldn't have been. That's thin. There's more. The AI ran facial aging on Greenberg's 1994 photo, cross-referenced against current residents in the Pacific Northwest. Torres pulled up the image on her laptop. Thomas Greenberg changed his name to Thomas Garrett, and he's living at Riverside Apartments, same building where Jennifer died. The captain stared at the screen. "Jesus Christ. There's something else," Torres said. "The building manager is Frank Morrison, the detective who worked the original case. Morrison's been living there for 20 years. Not just living, managing, running background checks on every tenant. I think he's been conducting an unauthorized investigation this entire time." The captain was quiet for a moment. "Find Morrison. Bring him in." Quietly. Frank sat across from Torres in an interview room he knew well. Different side of the table this time. "You've been watching Thomas Garrett for 18 months, Torres said. It wasn't a question. Frank didn't deny it. "Longer. I've been watching everyone who's lived in that building for 20 years. That's not police work, Frank. That's stalking. Call it what you want. I call it homework." Torres slid the AI analysis across the table. "Your homework might have been right. We can prove Garrett's alibi was fabricated. Facial recognition matches him to Greenberg. We've got enough for a warrant." Frank looked at the analysis. 20 years of his life, validated by an algorithm in 48 hours. "There's more," Frank said quietly. He pulled out his own files. 2 decades of documentation. Garrett's moved to 5 different cities since 1994. Each time, he builds relationships with young women matching Jennifer's profile. "I've tracked 2 restraining orders, 1 missing person case that was never solved, multiple complaints that got withdrawn." Torres studied the files. "This is obsessive. This is thorough. Frank, if this goes to trial, defense will tear you apart. Obsessed ex-cop stalking their client for 20 years. That's reasonable doubt served on a silver platter. Then don't put me on the stand. Use the AI. Use the evidence. I don't need credit. I just need him to pay for what he did to Jennifer." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Why her? Why couldn't you let this one go?" Frank looked out the interview room window at the rain-soaked Portland streets. "Because I was first on scene. I saw her apartment, the way he'd positioned her body, the respect he'd taken the time to show, closing her eyes, folding her hands. That's not random violence. That's personal. And I saw the case file notes. Greenberg had brought her cookies the week before. She'd thanked him, been polite, made the mistake of being kind to a predator. She died because she smiled at her neighbor, and nobody made him pay for that. So yeah, Detective Torres, I couldn't let it go." They came for Garrett at dawn. No raid, no drama. Just Torres, 2 uniforms, and a warrant. Frank watched from his apartment window as they led Garrett out in handcuffs. For just a moment, Garrett looked up, made eye contact with Frank through the window, and smiled. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that says, "I knew you were watching. I knew all along." Frank didn't smile back, just watched until the patrol car disappeared around the corner. 20 years. Jennifer Caldwell had been in the ground for 2 decades. Frank had sacrificed his career, his marriage, his life, to catch her killer. And now it was finally happening. The prosecution built their case carefully. AI analysis of the timeline contradictions, forensic review of old evidence with new technology, pattern evidence from Garrett's movements over 30 years. Frank's documentation was used, but Frank himself never testified. Too much baggage, too much obsession. Defense would have had a field day. Instead, they let the evidence speak. Garrett's defense attorney tried the expected angles: coincidence, circumstantial, an innocent man targeted by an obsessed ex-cop. But the AI analysis was unimpeachable. The timeline didn't lie. Garrett couldn't have been where he claimed the night Jennifer died. And then came the DNA. Forensic technology had improved since 1994. They'd retested evidence from Jennifer's apartment, skin cells under her fingernails. She'd fought back. The DNA matched Thomas Garrett. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. ACT 9. The rain stops. Frank stood outside the courthouse as they led Garrett away. 30 years. 2/3 of his life spent chasing this moment. Torres found him on the steps, collar turned up against the Portland drizzle. "You should be inside for the sentencing," she said. "Don't need to hear it. Just needed to know it happened. Frank, you sacrificed everything for this case. Don't you want some recognition?" Frank lit a cigarette, watched the rain beat on his coat. "Recognition? I lost my badge. My wife, 20 years of my life living in a building where a woman died, all because I couldn't let go of a case nobody else believed in. But you were right. Doesn't mean I was sane." Frank took a drag. "You know what the worst part is? Jennifer's still dead. Justice doesn't bring anyone back. It just makes the books balance." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Her sister was in the gallery. She wanted me to thank you. Tell her I'm sorry it took so long." Frank flicked his cigarette into a puddle and started walking. "Frank, where are you going?" He didn't turn around. "Home. Got an apartment building to manage." "You're staying?" "Someone's got to watch the place. Never know when another predator might show up." Torres watched him disappear into the Portland rain. "Some obsessions you solve. Some obsessions solve you." Frank Morrison had spent 20 years proving he wasn't crazy, but he'd never be able to prove he wasn't destroyed. The rain kept falling. It always does in Portland. And somewhere in the Riverside Apartments, apartment 314 sat empty, waiting for the next tenant who didn't know they were moving into a crime scene. Frank would be watching. He always was. Some detectives solve cases and move on. Some detectives become the case. Frank Morrison proved that obsession and justice aren't always enemies. Sometimes obsession is just justice that won't give up. The AI helped. Technology cracked what instinct couldn't prove. But at the end of it all, it was a broken cop living in a crime scene for 20 years who made sure Jennifer Caldwell's killer finally paid. The question isn't whether Frank was right. He was. The question is what that rightness cost him, and whether the price was worth it. Where technology meets the human cost of seeking truth. If you've got a story about someone who never gave up, someone who sacrificed everything to do what they believed was right, drop it in the comments. And if this story hit you, subscribe. Because sometimes the most important stories are about people who win and lose at the same time. Thanks for watching. Stay dry out there.